Alan and I are representing the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute. We each have a short presentation. Mine is going to be kind of on some cross-cutting themes of collaboration in New Mexico. So I'll go ahead and start sharing. To cut to the main point is that New Mexico collaboration in conservation, New Mexico style, is really not substantively different than collaboration probably anywhere else that we're working, but it has a different flavor and maybe some different emphases. Broadly speaking, there are quite a few collaborative groups and groups that call themselves collaborative, and they're scattered pretty well across the state. And what I'm showing you here is a list and map of just the ones we're aware of, and I think there are some coverage gaps, particularly in the Southeast, or just communities we don't engage with for a variety of reasons. I guess two other points I'd like to make here are that some organizations, such as our institute, which is not listed here, and like Kivera Coalition, I would consider them organizations that support collaboration, but maybe not necessarily always a collaborative organization by definition. I'd also like to point out that some groups call themselves collaboratives because they participate in collaboratives. They may host a collaborative meeting, but they are not a collaborative in the sense that their decision-making and membership are not representatives of all the stakeholders. They're basically a partner in a collaborative. So when you see names like Alliance, for example, be careful. It may or may not be a true collaborative group. It may be just the handy name that a local group gave themselves. And that's probably a topic for a whole nother session. Themes, just want to point out, and Alan's going to talk about this later, that we have this wonderful online map of collaboratives across the West. And in that map, we can summarize the different themes of collaboration. So I won't go through all of these, but these are basically the themes that collaborative organizations in New Mexico have identified as their kind of functions or purposes. And again, this slide will be shared and you'll be able to look at it in more detail. We're all familiar with different forms of collaborations. They can be formal or informal, based on projects, based on organizations, and based on geography. And the point I'd like to make here, based on my experience in New Mexico, is that collaborative groups kind of change their form and type over time. They can evolve from one to another and kind of revert back to where they started. So just something to be aware that they're very dynamic and change forms. Participation collaborative can be through a formal structure or informal. And I'd like to point out informal in the sense that oftentimes collaboration happens just by people that's deciding that there's an event going on and they're going to work together to help organize it or help pay for an activity or something like that. It's not necessarily within a formal collaborative group structure. There's no formal agreements. They just kind of work together on a project and they go back and do their own thing. I think that's really how collaboration often starts in New Mexico, and that can lead to more formal groups in the future, or it may be just what you always need for that. Participation in our collaborative groups can be everything from, small local groups through international nonprofits. The Nature Conservancy can be a partner in a collaborative, or it could just be the local hiking club. It's all over the spectrum there. One kind of characteristic I've noticed is how our private citizens' voices brought into collaboration. It's often not thought of very well in advance, and the public is invited to show up and participate in meetings, but they tend to also get crowded out unless they have like an organization who's really there to be their voice in the room. So something that's still kind of a work in progress in the collaboratives I work in is when we invite the public to participate in collaborative meetings, when it's time to come up with a decision or something, do they have a vote? Let's put it that way. something to consider. The main points I want to talk about today are dynamics and then some suggestions and recommendations later on. The thing that you've probably all seen and really strikes me here in New Mexico is that personal relationship often translates the organizational roles and relationships. So, you know, if you're an agency person or if you're a nonprofit person, really knowing people outside of the meeting context, outside of the organization, really tends to bring strength to the work that gets done in the collaboration. Politics, I'll be honest, we and you all probably do this. You know that there's people across the national political spectrum, but I have virtually never seen it come up in the meetings that we participated in. And I think it's because some people know that that's just not the venue to bring up national politics, or some people just, you know, basically based on their politics, they're not going to participate in a collaborative group on that subject. But it's something in the background to be aware of because it can make a difference once you start interacting on a policy level and with your politicians. And that's not a comfort level for many people. In the rural areas, I'll just make the point that if you're far from an urban area, ag dominates. If you're close to an urban area, recreation and other kind of conservation, endangered species, those like things seem to dominate the conversations. So we see that, you know, a place may look rural, but if you're within an easy drive of a city, those city stakeholders tend to really be a loud voice in collaboratives. Few other points here. I'll just say, you know, as the old white guy in the room, you know, women are on it. They, in my experience, are really the leaders, the spark plugs, the people who are getting stuff done on the ground. I just find that they're still in the background, maybe at the higher decision level, like on boards and stuff, male it's dominated, but when it talks about getting work done, I just see women as the dynamic force in New Mexico. There's some strange dynamics around tribal and Hispanic populations that came up fairly recently, especially over, you know, colonial history, things like that. Also, the land grants and tribes tend to be very loud critics of federal land management and will voice their frustrations and remind people of past injustices. And it's something that needs to be acknowledged. It doesn't necessarily derail things unless you let it derail things. I would also say that a lot of collaboration is centered around people who moved to Mexico from other places. And I think there's a lot of collaboration going on outside of our view. And we're just not connected socially into those networks. And things pop up seemingly from nowhere, but it might be something that's gone on for a while. And so finally, kind of big picture, I think maintaining those relationships is huge. Don't assume that nothing is happening just because you don't know it. Even in a topic that may be very close to your organization's purpose and interest, things can come out of left field. And other kind of traditional community groups like Kiwanis Club and all those actually are an important source of information and connection to the community. Basically, don't wait for people to come to you. Find out where they are, get yourself invited to their meetings. And even if it has nothing to do with the issue that you're interested in, it's a way to connect. I think there's still a need for capacity building and learning. I think collaborators have a lot to teach each other, but we're still rather fragmented. And participants, especially again, people coming from outside New Mexico here, need to kind of take a breath sometimes and be more aware of cultural sensitivity. Anglo culture, you know, tends to be a default behavior. We're go-getters, we're on top of things, we're loud, sometimes we're eager to get stuff done, and everybody else is in their own way, but it's just a different flavor. And that would be, again, another topic for a whole presentation. But that's one thing I've noticed in the interactions, especially people coming in new from outside in agencies, is it reminds me of being in the military. It's like we come in, take charge, got to make a list, pull up the Jamboard, get it done, and the folks are just ready to kind of get to know each other first. And so, again, my final thought is oftentimes we say, when we're given the challenge, it's, yeah, let's form a collaborative and just, step back a little bit, take a breath, and let collaboration happen as it's needed, and it doesn't have to be a formal group. So those are my main thoughts, and I was going to hand it over to Alan.
Thanks, Joe. I want to talk about networking collaborative groups in the Southwest, something that the Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute has been working on quite a bit for the last several years. So in addition to participating in the Western Collaborative Conservation Network, our institute also is involved in other efforts to network place-based conservation collaborative groups. So advance to slide 2, which is Southwest Collaborative Support Network. And so in 2020, right before the first WCCN confluence, we started a group called the Southwest Collaborative Support Network, and several people in the WCCN and on this in this meeting also participate in that group. We have participants from New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, and Utah. And we bring together facilitators and coordinators of place-based collaborative groups to engage in peer-to-peer discussions of topics that relate to managing collaborative organizations and building collaborative capacity. Next slide. So the mission of the Southwest Collaborative Support Network is to transform how stakeholders work collaboratively and sustain large landscapes and communities by building capacity and support among collaborative facilitators and leaders. Next slide. This slide shows some of the topics that we have discussed over the last 2.5 years related to leadership, documentation for collaboratives, communication and engagement with various groups, certification of collaboratives, assessment, readiness, transitions, adaptive management. We had a couple of sessions during the pandemic on facilitating video conference meetings, and then on post-pandemic collaboration as we were pulling out of the pandemic, returning to a face-to-face world and maintaining some of the benefits that people have learned and become more adept at using video conference technologies. So these are just some of the topics that I'm sure everybody here is familiar with these issues, but this gives us a chance to talk about them amongst facilitators and help us build our own capacity and ability to work effectively with collaborative groups. Next slide. This slide just shows some of the benefits of networking collaborative groups, basically sharing information, building resources, and enhancing collaborative capacity. Sorry, I'm going a little fast to these, but due to the limited amount of time, I want to kind of get to the topics later in this. So next slide. So at the beginning of the Southwest Collaborative Group, we developed kind of a model of the development of collaborative groups and going through getting started, growing, sustaining, and then either dissolving or evolving, which has really helped us think through some of the issues and struggles that collaborative groups go through, and has been a source of the topics that we've discussed. Next slide. So also, we've had some kind of subgroups that have formed. One of them met for about a year in monthly discussion groups on the topic of restorative and regenerative local economies. And we did some readings, held some discussions on how to structure the work of collaboratives so that they can accomplish ecological conservation goals in ways that also build local economies and communities. So kind of mixing them together into a sustainable development approach. Next. And then this is what I really wanted to kind of talk about in terms of our work in the Southwest and the Western Collaborative Conservation Network. And I think for networks to operate effectively, they have to have direct connections and impact on place-based collaborative groups. And so what we've been doing at the Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute is working to build kind of a hierarchy of networks and communications channels between place-based collaborative groups and the Southwest Collaborative Support Network and ultimately the WCCN. So regional networks like the Southwest Collaborative Support Network can play an important role in kind of connecting the WCCN to place-based collaboratives and also in finding ways to network collaboratives in their place can add opportunities for better and clearer communication. So the idea is to link place-based collaboratives into kind of place-based networks or conglaboratives, which is a term that Aaron Kimple, some of you know, has participated in WCCN, came up with a conglomerative of collaboratives, which are organizations that have representation from collaborative groups and also from local organizations and agencies. So they're a sort of a form of a network. And these networks and conglomeratives can collect concerns and challenges that collaboratives are facing, transmit these to support networks like the Southwest Collaborative Support Network, and then the networks can then address these issues and develop resources and transmit these back to the collaborative groups, or also can bring these to larger groups like the WCCN. So it's kind of building this hierarchy, and to be successful, the regional networks or the networks that are linking local groups have to provide benefits, I think, that are sufficient to offset just the time burden that it takes and the coordination that's required of those who are participating in these local networks. So next slide. So for this hierarchy to function well, the groups at all the levels have to have a clear idea of what their responsibilities are, a division of labor, so to speak, and place-based collaboratives have to have improving capacity, their own capacity as a goal, so that they can effectively participate in these networks. And networking doesn't have to be face-to-face. One of the things we're working on at our institute is trying to figure out how to make technological-based networks now that everybody's kind of familiar with using technologies for collaboration. And so technologies can be used to collect groups, to share information, but having clear and well-understood paths of communication, I think, is necessary for networks and this hierarchy of networks to function well. Next slide. And then another way of networking collaboratives is through maps, and Joe talked about the map that we have. We have a map of collaboratives in the state of New Mexico, and then we have another map that is west-wide. Maps show the locations of collaborative groups, but can also highlight a lot of other information about the landscapes where collaboratives work, the focus and goals of the collaborative groups, the kinds of settings, land ownership and things where collaboratives work, partner organizations, where to access resources, things of that nature. So next slide. So the collaborative map, the Western collaborative map that the Southwest Collaborative Support Network, Western Collaborative Conservation Network, and some partner organizations have worked on and created is a map of collaboratives in states around the Western US, the states that are outlined there. It's available at findacollaborative.org, and it shows collaborative groups and also support organizations. The red dots are locations of collaborative groups, and the blue dots are organizations that provide support and resources to collaborative groups. Next slide. So, and the map allows collaborative group members to search for other groups with similar goals and projects. It allows them to find nearby support organizations. It helps them develop networks with other collaborative groups. The public can also use the map to find nearby collaborative groups or read about collaboratives and the projects they're working on. or also to be able to join a collaborative group. Next slide. And so to join the map, you have to fill out a brief survey. If any of your collaboratives are not on the map and you want to do so, you can contact me. My email is there at the bottom, and I will send you the survey, and then you fill out the survey. And the point of the survey is that it allows us to create filters, or to have groups join these filters that people can then use to find specific information on the map. So you fill out the survey, and then we submit it. The Agricultural Research Service in Tucson, USDA ARS, is hosting the map, and so we'll send the information from them, and they will add you to the map. So then you can go to the last slide, which just shows my contact information, and that's the collaborative mapping project.